Good evening, guys. So, welcome to Tuesday's training. So today we're going to talk a bit about authority. Authority and its necessity in order to heal. Now, in codependency, narcissistic abuse trauma, or the trauma, or discard trauma, as I call it, we were conditioned to give up our authority. We give up our authority over what we want, who we are, what we're allowed to do, what we'll choose to be, what we feel. I remember distinctly in my journey that I gave up the authority to feel. I said, well, everybody else knows better what I should be feeling, so I'll feel what they tell me to feel. I'll be who they think I should be because they're smarter than I am about who I am. I was conditioned to surrender my autonomy, my personal power, to a higher religious system that I was a member of. And that conditioned me to shape myself in ways that harmed me and that robbed me of a true sense of myself. This is one of the reasons why authority is really important to retrieve when we're dealing with codependency, when we're wondering who we are. For instance, if you're struggling to know who you are, one of the first most primal steps I take my clients through is retrieving their sense of authority, their, I call it personal autonomy, back to them so they can start occupying the space that they be. Okay, because if we're not here with our body, we're not here in our essence, we're not going to know who we are. Because you can't figure out who you are from an analytical experience. It's got to be discovered through your beingness, through the essence, through the energy that you be. If we're going to really do that, we need to retrieve authority about being who we are. We have to connect with the experience that we have the right to choose who we'll be. We have a right to choose what we feel. We have a right to acknowledge that I feel something and it's not what you want, that kind of thing. Because I grew up in that environment that said, hey, if you're not feeling what we think you should be feeling, you're wrong. Does that sound familiar to anybody? So getting through that was a really scary thing because we had to suddenly, I had to suddenly accept what I felt and become willing to be seen that way. Okay. Another thing with healing is that if we're attached externally to other people's feedback, their approval, for instance, gives us permission to be a certain way, gives us permission to show up and do a certain thing, our healing is going to be regulated or narrowed according to those expectations. Instead of actually discovering who we are, which is part of what healing is really about when we deal with narcissistic or codependent healing, we instead become who we think they want us to be because we think they're an authority over us. We think they know better than we do for us. And this is one of the most essential things about retrieving authority. This is why we need it back so that our healing actually becomes genuine to us. Hi, Benny. And so it's a really important thing to understand that when we retrieve authority, we're actually retrieving our capability to discover and define our future and understand who we truly be so that our happiness becomes an organic experience for us. And we're no longer shaping ourselves to somebody else's expectations. We're no longer being controlled or puppeted by other people's approval or rejection. Instead, we have the sovereignty, the power to define what we'll do with those events. We can agree with the approval, we can agree with the rejection, we can disagree with them. But at a minimum, at least we're operating from authority. We're operating from our own personal ability to choose for ourselves. So this is why authority is essential to our healing, because it helps us gain the freedom to define who we be beyond the trauma, beyond codependency, beyond religious or narcissistic abuse, whatever it might be. So if you're struggling to know who you are, you're struggling to get out of a loop in your healing where you're like, man, I keep doing these things, but I keep coming back to these set points. I keep showing up the same way. Nothing's changing for me. You want to ask yourself this question. Are you operating from the assumption that are you operating from someone else's perspective or assumption about what healing should be? Are you trying to please someone? Are you trying to help? Are you trying to get them to like you because you're healing? I see this a lot with the earliest stages of codependence codependent recovery is because they're out there getting better in hopes that their partner or their narcissistic object will change their behavior and take them back. Are you doing that? Because if you're doing that, you're sabotaging your healing. You're making their approval, their change, their response to you authority over your healing. You gotta take that authority back and say, you know, as I heal, I have a right to know who I become. I have a right to be the person I choose to become in that. And I have a right to be loved, known, and kept as that person. That doesn't mean you have a right to expect someone else to keep you that way, because that would be violating their autonomy to choose who they have in their life. But you do have a right to say, you know, I deserve to be known as I am, for who I am, and loved and kept for who I am. Period. That's one of the biggest, strongest points of reference in authority we can hold, because then we are shining as we are. We're radiant from our brilliance, from our position, from our wholeness. And that, you only get to that space, guys, by retrieving your authority over your healing, over your choices, over your actions, over your feelings. You have a right to feel whatever you feel. Like in my experience, especially with the narcissistic side of my past, where I was abused, I didn't have a right to feel certain things. That's what I was taught, at least. I had no authority to feel what I felt, and I should feel a certain way. That was like chronic. I was like, mm-mm. And it took me a long time to get out of that, because I'd have a feeling and then I would go seek approval for it. Like, is this okay to feel? Is it okay for me to feel this way? Is it okay for me to experience this thing? Is it okay for me to do this? Is it okay for me to express that, or to have this experience, this feeling about what's going on? Because I had it torn out of me that I shouldn't feel certain ways and shouldn't feel certain things. And that robbed me of being really deeply connected to me. And if you relate to that, then you have been abused emotionally and disconnected from yourself. Your first and most powerful step in healing that, is to give yourself permission to feel whatever you feel. All feelings are legitimate, and that's essential to part of your healing anyway, because like, I feel really angry, or feel really sad, or really scared, or really happy, or really joyful. You have a right to all of those feelings, regardless of what the context is. Okay? So if you're truly going to take healing seriously in your life, you're going to truly move beyond codependency. You're going to move beyond that trauma, beyond the narcissistic abuse. You're going to need to take back authority over who you are and what you'll be. You're going to need to occupy the space to discover who you are as you heal. So you're no longer shaping your healing to someone else's expectations. You're discovering it instead. And that's one of the big signals, guys. If you're in your authority and you're discovering shit, that tells you you're in your authority, because it's the only place you really discover anything anyway. Because if you're not in your authority, you're conforming to something else. You're not going to discover a whole lot, other than a lot of frustration, because you're trying to shape yourself to fit them in some way. Okay? So that's what I want you to think about today. And today's training is, where am I giving up my authority? Who am I giving my authority to? And it's easy to find out where that is. Who are you seeking approval from? Who are you seeking love from? Whose rejection are you allowing to define yourself? And how are you treating yourself? Are you rejecting yourself when you fail? Are you rejecting yourself when you succeed? That does happen. Are you rejecting yourself because you have a feeling? What are you judging as wrong about you? And then you can look at that and go, do I want to change that? Do I want different results there? But ultimately, you can easily detect that you're giving your authority away if you're seeking other people's approval or permission to be a certain person, place, or thing in your life. Because yeah, you can be a thing. You can be a particular object. Like, I'm a computer tech. That would be an object. I'm a coach. That's an object. It's the role we play. You could be a place, like, hey, yeah, I'm a fun person. It's a fun place to be with Marshall, that kind of thing. And then who you're going to be. So I want you to be looking at that, and then post below what you discover, what comes up for you in this experience, and any questions you have about that. Because authority can be a little nebulous. It can be an odd concept to think about because usually we're taught to obey and taught to conform rather than taught to introspect and choose for ourselves without the fear of being discarded. You know, healthy relationships, that's how they work. They're like, what do you want? Oh, I want this. Cool. Now you may not agree with the decision they made, but doesn't mean you discard them and you get rid of them. That means that you just say, yeah, I disagree with that. Here's my point of view. And they're like, cool. Well, I'm making this choice because I'm an autonomous being and this is what brings me joy. So suck it. That kind of thing. That's how we really do authority. It's a very simple thing. I get to make the choice in my life. You get to make the choice in your life. So there you go, guys. I appreciate you. Tomorrow we'll have more on authority because that's this week's theme. If you have any questions or anything you want to remark, just post in the comments below and let me know what you got out of today's training. Thank you, guys, and I will talk with you tomorrow. Bye-bye.